The dust rose in thick plumes behind his horse as Jake Morrison spotted something unusual in the arroyo below. A young woman crouched beside a bawling calf, her rifle aimed directly at a pack of coyotes circling just beyond the rocks. The Wyoming territory stretched endlessly around them in the summer of 1876, and Jake had been riding the range for 3 weeks straight, searching for strays from the Triple Bar Ranch, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of this fierce guardian protecting something that clearly was not hers to protect. He urged his buckskin gelding down the slope, his hand resting on his own Winchester, watching as the woman never flinched even as the coyotes grew bolder. She was maybe 20 years old, her dark hair tied back with a strip of leather, wearing a worn calico dress covered by a man's jacket that had seen better days. The calf behind her was bleeding from its hindquarters, lying on its side and making pitiful sounds that echoed off the canyon walls. Jake fired a shot into the air and the coyotes scattered like smoke in the wind. The woman whirled around, her rifle now pointed at his chest, and he raised his hands slowly, keeping his horse still. "Easy there," he called out. "I work for the Triple Bar, that calf's got our brand." She did not lower the rifle immediately, and Jake could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly from holding the weapon for what must have been hours. Her face was sunburned, her lips cracked, and there was a desperation about her that made him think she had been out here far longer than was safe. "I found it this morning," she said, her voice hoarse. "Those coyotes have been after it ever since. I could not just leave it to die." Jake dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. "I appreciate that, miss. Not many folks would bother with a wounded animal that was not theirs. Can I take a look at it?" She studied him for a long moment, then finally lowered the rifle. Up close, Jake could see she was prettier than he had first thought, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of honey. There was something fierce and unbroken about her, like a wild mustang that had never known a rope. "My name is Clara Whitfield," she said. "I live about 5 miles east of here with my father and younger brother. I was out looking for our milk cow when I heard the calf crying." Jake knelt beside the calf, examining the wounds carefully. The animal had been attacked, probably by a mountain lion given the deep claw marks, and had lost a fair amount of blood. "This little fellow is in bad shape. We need to get these wounds cleaned and stitched, or infection will kill him faster than any predator." "I have some supplies back at our homestead," Clara said quickly. "My father was a veterinarian back in Ohio before we came west. I learned some from watching him work." Jake looked up at her, surprised. "You know how to stitch up an animal." "I have done it before," she said, lifting her chin with pride. "I am not some helpless girl who faints at the sight of blood," he believed her. Everything about Clara Whitfield suggested she was tougher than rawhide and twice as stubborn. "All right then, but we need to move fast. Can you ride?" "I walked here," she admitted. "My horse threw a shoe yesterday and we cannot afford the blacksmith right now." Jake made a decision that would change everything, though he did not know it yet. "You ride my horse with the supplies we need. I will carry the calf. It is not far if we move quick." Clara hesitated, then nodded. She gave him directions to her homestead, and Jake carefully lifted the calf, which weighed maybe 80 pounds and was weak enough not to struggle much. Clara climbed onto his buckskin with surprising grace, and they set off across the prairie with the afternoon sun beating down on them like a hammer on an anvil. The Whitfield homestead was more ramshackle than Jake had expected. A small sod house with a sagging roof, a lean-to barn that looked ready to collapse, and a vegetable garden that was struggling in the harsh Wyoming soil. A thin man with graying hair emerged from the house, leaning heavily on a cane, and a boy of about 12 followed behind him. "Clara," the man called out, relief flooding his weathered face. "I was about to send Thomas looking for you." "I am fine, Pa," Clara said, sliding off the horse. "But we have a patient." Jake carried the calf into the barn, which was marginally cooler than outside, and laid it on a bed of clean straw that Clara quickly prepared. Her father, Samuel Whitfield, came in slowly, his breathing labored, and Jake could see the man was not well. There was a grayish pallor to his skin and a weakness in his movements that spoke of serious illness. "Thank you for helping my daughter," Samuel said, extending a trembling hand. "I would have gone myself, but I am not much use these days." Jake shook his hand gently. "Jake Morrison, sir. I work for the Triple Bar Ranch. Your daughter saved this calf's life by keeping those coyotes at bay." Samuel smiled with obvious pride. "Clara has always had a soft heart for creatures in need. Gets that from her mother, God rest her soul." Clara was already gathering supplies: a bottle of carbolic acid, clean rags, a needle and thread, and a basin of water. She worked with efficient, practiced movements, and Jake found himself impressed by her competence. She cleaned the wounds thoroughly while Jake held the calf still, her hands steady despite the gruesome nature of the task. "You will need to hold him tighter," she said. "This is going to hurt." Jake braced himself, and Clara began stitching the deepest of the claw marks. The calf thrashed weakly, but Jake kept it secure, watching as Clara's nimble fingers worked the needle through torn flesh with surprising skill. Her brother Thomas brought fresh water, and Samuel supervised from a stool near the door, offering advice when needed. It took nearly an hour to clean and stitch all the wounds. By the time Clara tied off the final thread, they were both sweating and exhausted. The calf lay quiet, its breathing steadier now, and Clara sat back on her heels with a satisfied nod. "He will make it, I think," she said. "If we can keep the wounds clean and get him to drink, he has a fighting chance." Jake looked at her with newfound respect. "You did good work, Miss Whitfield. Real good work." She met his eyes, and for a moment something passed between them, a connection, a recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps. Then Clara looked away, wiping her bloody hands on a rag. "The calf needs to stay here for a few days," Jake said, making another decision that would bind him to this place. "He cannot be moved until those stitches set and he gets his strength back. I will need to stay nearby to look after him and make sure he pulls through. That calf is valuable to the ranch." Samuel nodded slowly. "We have a spare room. It is not much, but you are welcome to it, Mr. Morrison. It is the least we can offer after you helped Clara today." "I would be obliged," Jake said, though he knew perfectly well he could have ridden back to the ranch and returned in a few days. Something about this family, about Clara in particular, made him want to stay. That evening, Clara prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, stretching their meager supplies to feed an extra mouth. Jake noticed how thin the portions were, how carefully Clara divided everything to make sure her father and brother got more than she did. The Whitfields were barely scraping by, that much was clear, and Jake felt a pang of sympathy for them. "How long have you been in Wyoming?" Jake asked as they ate. 2 years, Samuel replied. "We came from Ohio after my wife died of consumption. I thought the dry air out here might help my own health, but I was wrong about that." He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that made Clara wince. "We filed a claim on this land, but farming has proven harder than I expected. I am too sick to do much work, and Clara and Thomas do their best, but it is not enough." "Pa, do not trouble Mr. Morrison with our problems," Clara said quietly. "It is no trouble," Jake said. "I grew up on a hardscrabble farm in Missouri. I know how hard it can be." Thomas, who had been silent throughout the meal, finally spoke up. "Are you really a cowboy? Have you been on cattle drives?" Jake smiled. "I have been on 2 drives up to Montana. Long, dusty work, but it pays decent." The boy's eyes lit up with admiration, and Jake spent the next hour telling stories about life on the trail, about stampedes and river crossings and the vast herds of buffalo they had seen. Clara listened quietly, occasionally adding wood to the fire, and Jake found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the way the firelight played across her face, the graceful way she moved. When it grew late, Samuel and Thomas retired to their shared bedroom, leaving Jake alone with Clara as she cleaned up the dishes. He helped her, carrying water from the well outside, and they worked in comfortable silence for a while. "Thank you for staying," Clara said finally. I know you probably have other responsibilities. The calf is my responsibility, Jake said, and besides, I do not mind the company. Clara smiled just a little. We do not get many visitors out here. It is nice to have someone new to talk to. You must get lonely, Jake observed. Sometimes, she admitted. But there is always work to do and I have Pa and Thomas. That is enough most days. Jake wanted to ask her more about her mother, about what had brought them west, about what she dreamed of beyond this struggling homestead, but he sensed she was not ready to open up yet. So instead, he bid her good night and retired to the small room she had prepared for him, lying awake on the narrow cot and listening to the coyotes howling in the distance. The next morning, Jake woke before dawn and checked on the calf. The animal was still weak but alert, and the wounds looked clean. Clara was already up, working in the garden, and Jake joined her after a simple breakfast. You do not have to help, she protested as he began pulling weeds alongside her. I know, Jake said, but I want to. They worked together through the cool morning hours, and Jake found himself enjoying Clara's company more than he had enjoyed anyone's in a long time. She was smart and funny when she relaxed enough to let her guard down, and she knew an astonishing amount about farming, animal husbandry, and survival in the harsh western landscape. My father taught me everything he could before he got too sick, she explained. He wanted to make sure Thomas and I could manage if something happened to him. You care for him a lot, Jake said. He is all we have, Clara replied simply. Our mother died 3 years ago and Pa has been sick for almost as long. The doctors in Ohio said his lungs were damaged from working in a factory when he was young. They told him he did not have much time left. Jake heard the pain in her voice and felt a surge of protectiveness toward this brave young woman who was carrying such a heavy burden. I am sorry. That must be hard on you and your brother. We manage, Clara said, but there was a weariness in her voice that belied her words. Over the next 3 days, Jake threw himself into helping the Whitfields with whatever needed doing. He repaired the sagging barn roof, fixed a broken fence rail, and helped Thomas hunt rabbits for the stew pot. He checked on the calf regularly, pleased to see the animal growing stronger each day, drinking milk that Clara coaxed into it with infinite patience. And he spent as much time as he could with Clara, learning about her in the stolen moments between chores. He learned that she loved reading but had only 3 books to her name, which she had read so many times she could recite passages from memory. He learned that she could shoot as well as any man, having taught herself when her father became too weak to hunt. He learned that she had wanted to be a teacher once back in Ohio, but that dream had died when her mother got sick and the family needed her to work. On the 4th evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara finally asked the question Jake had been expecting. When are you leaving? Jake had been thinking about that very question. The calf was strong enough to travel now, and he had obligations to the Triple Bar. His boss would be wondering what had happened to him, but the thought of riding away and never seeing Clara again felt wrong, like leaving something precious unfinished. Tomorrow, I suppose, he said reluctantly. I need to get the calf back to the ranch and report in. I have been gone longer than I should have been already. Clara nodded, staring at the horizon. I figured as much. Thank you for all your help. You did not have to fix things around here, but I appreciate it. Pa does too, even if he is too proud to say so. Clara, Jake said, then hesitated, unsure how to voice what he was feeling. He had known this woman for less than a week, but she had gotten under his skin in a way no one else ever had. I would like to come back. If that would be all right with you. She turned to look at him, surprise and something else, hope maybe, flickering in her eyes. You would want to come back here? I would want to see you again, Jake clarified, his heart pounding. I know we have not known each other long, but I feel like I have found something out here I did not even know I was looking for. Clara's cheeks flushed pink and she looked down at her hands. I would like that. I would like that very much. Jake reached over and gently took her hand, and when she did not pull away, he felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. They sat like that until full dark, talking quietly about everything and nothing, and when Jake finally retired to his room, he felt more content than he had in years. The next morning, Jake loaded the now healthy calf onto his horse, securing it carefully for the ride back to the Triple Bar. The Whitfields came out to see him off, Samuel shaking his hand and Thomas looking disappointed that his new hero was leaving. Clara walked with Jake a little ways from the house, and when they were out of sight of her family, he turned to face her. "I will be back in 3 days," he promised. "Maybe sooner if I can swing it." "I will be here," Clara said softly. Jake wanted to kiss her but was not sure if it would be welcome, so instead he squeezed her hand one more time and mounted his horse. He looked back twice as he rode away, and both times Clara was still standing there watching him, her hand raised in farewell. The ride back to the Triple Bar took most of the day, and by the time Jake arrived, the ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Dutch Keller, was not happy. "Where the hell have you been, Morrison?" Dutch demanded. "You were supposed to be back 4 days ago." Jake explained about finding the injured calf and needing to stay while it healed, carefully leaving out most of the details about the Whitfields. Dutch grumbled but accepted the explanation, especially when he saw the calf was in good shape despite its ordeal. "You did good work patching him up," Dutch said grudgingly, "but next time send word if you are going to be gone that long." "Yes, sir," Jake agreed. That night, lying in the bunkhouse surrounded by snoring cowboys, Jake could not stop thinking about Clara. He thought about her courage in facing down those coyotes, about her skilled hands stitching up the calf, about the way she smiled when she forgot to be guarded. He thought about the hardship she was facing, trying to keep her family afloat while her father slowly died, and he felt a fierce desire to help her, to be there for her. The next 2 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jake threw himself into his work, riding fence lines and helping move cattle to better grazing, but his mind was always 5 miles east, wondering what Clara was doing, if she was thinking about him the way he was thinking about her. On the evening of the second day, he approached Dutch with a request. "I need to take Sunday off," Jake said. "There is something I need to do." Dutch gave him a knowing look. "This have anything to do with that calf, maybe," Jake said evasively. "Or maybe it has to do with whoever was taking care of that calf," Dutch said with a grin. "You got a girl out there, Morrison?" Jake felt his face heat up. "I have a friend who could use some help with her homestead, that is all." "Uh-huh," Dutch said, clearly not believing him. "Well, you have been working hard, so take your Sunday, but I expect you back Monday morning sharp." "Thank you, sir." Sunday dawned clear and hot, and Jake was on his horse before sunrise, a sack of supplies tied behind his saddle. He had bought flour, sugar, coffee, and salt pork with his last month's wages, knowing the Whitfields needed it more than he needed money in his pocket. He had also bought a book, a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman, after remembering how Clara had said she loved to read. The ride to the Whitfield homestead felt longer than it ever had before, but finally, Jake saw the familiar sod house in the distance. Clara was outside hanging laundry, and when she spotted him, her face lit up with such genuine joy that Jake felt his heart stutter. "You came back," she said, as if she had not quite believed he would. "I said I would," Jake replied, dismounting and pulling down the supply sack. "I brought some things, I hope you do not mind." Clara looked in the sack and her eyes widened. "Jake, this is too much. We cannot accept this." "Yes, you can," Jake said firmly. "Consider it payment for room and board the other week." "You more than paid for that with all the work you did," Clara protested, but Jake could see she was touched by the gesture. "Then consider it a gift from a friend," Jake said. "Please, Clara, let me help." She bit her lip, then nodded. "Thank you. This will make a real difference." Jake spent that Sunday working alongside the Whitfields again, and as the weeks turned into months, it became his routine. Every Sunday, and sometimes on his days off during the week, he would ride out to the homestead and help with whatever needed doing. He taught Thomas how to rope and ride better. He sat with Samuel and listened to stories about Ohio and Clara's mother, whose name had been Elizabeth, and who by all accounts had been as remarkable as her daughter. And he courted Clara, though neither of them called it that at first. They would take walks in the evening after chores were done, talking about their dreams and fears. Jake told her about his own family. His parents had died when he was 16, leaving him and his sister alone. His sister had married a storekeeper in Missouri and was happy now with 3 children. But Jake had felt called to the West, to the open spaces and the freedom of the cowboy life. Clara told him about her childhood in Ohio, about helping her father in his veterinary practice, about her mother's long illness and how it had drained their savings. She told him about the hopes they had all had when they came west, and how those hopes had slowly withered as they realized how hard life on the frontier truly was. "Sometimes I feel like I am just surviving, not living," Clara admitted one evening in late August as they sat by the creek that ran near the homestead. "Every day is about getting through to the next one, making sure Pa is comfortable, making sure Thomas has enough to eat. I do not even remember what it feels like to think about the future, to plan for something beyond next week." "What would you want?" Jake asked gently. "If you could plan for the future," Clara was quiet for a long moment, trailing her fingers through the cool water. "I would want Pa to be well again, though I know that will not happen. I would want Thomas to have a chance at a real education, to be more than a struggling farmer, and for myself." She paused, then looked at Jake with something vulnerable in her eyes. "I would want to have a family of my own someday, children, a home that is not always on the edge of falling apart, maybe even those books I always wanted." "You would make a wonderful mother," Jake said and meant it. "Do you want children?" Clara asked. "I never thought much about it before," Jake admitted. "The cowboy life does not lend itself to family. But lately I have been thinking maybe I want something different, something more permanent." They looked at each other, and the unspoken hung between them, the possibility of a future together, of building something lasting. Jake wanted to reach for her, to close the distance between them, but he held back. Clara had enough burdens without him rushing her into something she might not be ready for. But as summer faded into fall, their relationship deepened. In late September, Samuel's condition worsened, and Jake found himself spending more and more time at the homestead, helping Clara care for the dying man while also trying to keep the farm running and Thomas occupied. One October morning, Samuel called Jake into his room. The older man looked like a ghost of himself, his skin paper-thin, his breathing labored and wet. "Jake," Samuel said, his voice barely a whisper, "I need to ask you something?" "Anything, sir," Jake said, sitting beside the bed. "When I am gone, Clara and Thomas will have nothing. This homestead is not worth anything. The land is poor, and we have not been able to prove up our claim properly. They will lose it within months." Samuel paused to catch his breath. "I know you care for my daughter. I see it in the way you look at her, in the way you have helped us these past months. Will you take care of her, Jake, and Thomas too? Will you give them the family and security I could not provide?" Jake felt the weight of Samuel's request settle on his shoulders. He had been in love with Clara for weeks now, though he had not said the words aloud. The thought of marrying her, of taking on the responsibility of her and her brother, should have terrified him. Instead, he felt a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. "I will, sir," Jake promised. "If Clara will have me, I will take care of them both. You have my word." Relief flooded Samuel's face. "Thank you. You are a good man, Jake Morrison, better than I could have hoped for my girl." Samuel Whitfield died 3 days later on a cold October morning with the first snow of the season dusting the ground. Clara held his hand as he took his last breath, and Jake stood behind her with his hands on her shoulders, offering what comfort he could. Thomas cried openly, and Jake held the boy afterward, letting him grieve. They buried Samuel on a hill overlooking the homestead, under a cottonwood tree that was shedding its golden leaves. Jake said a few words, and Clara read a passage from the Bible, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Afterward, they returned to the house and Jake built up the fire while Clara sat staring into the flames, her grief too deep for words. That night, after Thomas had cried himself to sleep, Jake and Clara sat together in front of the fire. Jake knew he needed to speak now, while the future was uncertain and Clara needed to know she had options. "Clara," he said gently, taking her cold hand in his. "I made a promise to your father before he died. I told him I would take care of you and Thomas." Clara looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "Jake, you do not have to feel obligated." "It is not obligation," Jake interrupted. "I love you, Clara. I think I have loved you since that first day when I saw you guarding that calf, fierce and brave and unwilling to give up. These past months getting to know you have been the best of my life. I know this is terrible timing and I know you are grieving, but I need you to know that you are not alone. You have me if you want me." Fresh tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but she was smiling too. "I love you too, Jake. I have for a while now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid to hope that you might feel the same way." Jake pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, burying her face against his chest and crying for everything she had lost and everything she might yet have. He held her until the fire burned low and the night grew cold, and when she finally pulled back to look at him, he saw hope in her eyes alongside the grief. "Will you marry me, Clara?" Jake asked. "I do not have much, just my wages and a horse and saddle, but I will work hard for you and Thomas. I will give you the life you deserve." "Yes," Clara whispered. "Yes, Jake, I will marry you." They were married a week later by the circuit preacher who came through every month with Thomas as their witness and a few folks from town who Jake had invited. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slimmer frame, and Jake wore his best shirt and a new string tie he had bought special for the occasion. Dutch and some of the other cowboys from the Triple Bar came to the simple ceremony, and afterward Dutch pulled Jake aside. "You are making a big change, Morrison," Dutch said. "Married life is not like cowboy life. You sure you are ready for it?" "I am sure," Jake said, watching Clara talk with Thomas, her hand resting protectively on her brother's shoulder. "This is what I want." "Well, you cannot live in the bunkhouse now that you have got a wife," Dutch said. "But the ranch has been looking for someone to run the line shack up in the North Range. It comes with a small cabin and a bit more pay. Job is yours if you want it." Jake felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you, Dutch." "I will take it. You are a good worker and you have got a good head on your shoulders," Dutch said. "The Triple Bar is lucky to have you." So Jake and Clara and Thomas moved to the line shack cabin a week after the wedding. It was small, just 2 rooms and a lean-to for the horses. But it was sturdier than the Whitfield homestead had been, and it came with the security of Jake's steady wages. Clara threw herself into making it a home, hanging curtains she sewed from flour sacks, and arranging their few possessions with care. Thomas adjusted to the change better than Jake had expected. The boy helped with chores and started attending the school in town, riding in twice a week with Jake when he went to pick up supplies. Jake taught him the cowboy trade in the evenings and on weekends, showing him how to read tracks, how to doctor sick cattle, how to handle a rope and a horse. And Clara bloomed like a flower after a long drought. With the constant worry about money and her father's illness lifted from her shoulders, she relaxed in ways Jake had never seen before. She laughed more, smiled more, and gradually the haunted look left her eyes. Their marriage was everything Jake had hoped for and more. Clara was an equal partner in every sense, working alongside him when the ranch work demanded it and managing their household with competent grace. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing their thoughts and dreams, and slowly they built something precious together, a partnership based on love and mutual respect. The physical side of their marriage unfolded naturally, tentatively at first as they learned each other, then with growing passion and confidence. Clara had been innocent when they married, but she approached their intimate life with the same fearless curiosity she brought to everything else. And Jake discovered that making love to someone you genuinely loved was entirely different from the brief, unsatisfying encounters he had had in saloons before meeting her. That first winter was hard but good. The cabin was cold, and they went through a blizzard in January that kept them snowed in for a week, but they made the best of it. Jake taught Thomas to play chess using pieces he carved from wood. Clara read to them from her small collection of books, and Jake added to it whenever he could afford to, bringing her a new volume every month or so. In February, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Jake one evening after Thomas had gone to bed, her hand resting on her still flat belly and a mixture of joy and nervousness on her face. "I think I am carrying a baby," she said quietly. "I have missed my courses for 2 months now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." Jake felt like the breath had been knocked out of him. A baby. Their baby. He pulled Clara into his arms, holding her tight, feeling the magnitude of this new responsibility settling over him. "Are you happy?" Clara asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "I am terrified," Jake admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I am so happy, Clara." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining. "Me too. I wanted to be sure before I told you, but I am sure now. We are going to have a baby." They told Thomas the next day, and the boy was excited at the prospect of being an uncle, though Jake gently corrected him that he would be more like a brother to the new baby. They told Dutch and the other ranch hands, who teased Jake mercilessly but also offered sincere congratulations. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara continued to work alongside Jake through the spring, refusing to let him coddle her, though she did agree to take on lighter tasks as her belly grew. Jake found himself constantly worrying about her, about the baby, about all the things that could go wrong. He had heard too many stories about women dying in childbirth, about babies that came too early or never drew breath, and the fear haunted him. But Clara seemed confident and unafraid. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him when he fussed too much. "I am strong and healthy. Everything will be fine." In late September, as the leaves were turning and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter, Clara's labor began. Jake sent Thomas racing to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day, and it was the longest, most terrifying time of Jake's life. He stayed with Clara when Mrs. Henderson allowed it, holding her hand and offering words of encouragement, and he paced outside when the midwife shooed him out. Thomas sat with him, both of them silent and worried, until finally they heard the thin wail of a newborn baby. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Morrison, and your wife is doing just fine." Jake's knees went weak with relief. "Can I see them? Give me a moment to get them cleaned up, then you can come in." When Jake finally entered the bedroom, he found Clara propped up against pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, with a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She smiled at him, and Jake went to her side, looking down at the impossibly small person they had created together. "He looks like you," Clara said softly. "He has your nose." Jake touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling when the little fingers instinctively curled around his rough, calloused one. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much, Clara." "I love you too," Clara said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Jake thought of Clara's father, the man who had entrusted him with his daughter's happiness. "What about Samuel?" Jake suggested. "After your father." Clara's eyes filled with tears, the good kind this time. "Samuel Morrison. Yes, I like that. I think Pa would have liked it too." Baby Samuel thrived, growing strong and healthy through his first winter. He had Jake's dark hair and Clara's honey-colored eyes, and he was a generally content baby, rarely fussing except when he was hungry or needed changing. Clara proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, and Jake discovered that fatherhood suited him in ways he never would have expected. Thomas adored his nephew, playing with him gently and helping Clara care for him whenever he could. At 14 now, Thomas was shooting up tall and showing real promise as a cattleman. Jake had been teaching him everything he knew, and Dutch had already said he would hire the boy on as a regular hand when he turned 16. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the next few years. Jake continued working for the Triple Bar, gradually earning more responsibility and better pay. Clara managed their household and raised Samuel, and later their daughter Elizabeth, named for Clara's mother, who was born in the summer of 1879. Thomas grew into a capable young man, eventually taking a position at the Triple Bar and courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher. In the spring of 1881, Dutch called Jake into the ranch office for a meeting. The old foreman was slowing down, talking about retirement, and he had been grooming Jake to eventually take his place. "The boss wants to make you assistant foreman," Dutch said without preamble. "It comes with a significant raise and a better house, one of the old homesteads on ranch property that we bought out last year. It has got a real house, Jake, with 4 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Good land for a garden and some chickens. Figured with your family growing, you could use the space." Jake could hardly believe his good fortune. "I do not know what to say, Dutch. Thank you. You have earned it," Dutch said gruffly. "You are the hardest worker I have got, and the men respect you. When I retire next year, the foreman job will be yours if you want it." Jake accepted the promotion, and that summer they moved into the homestead house. Clara cried when she saw it, happy tears this time. The house had glass windows, wood floors, and enough space for their growing family to spread out. There was a barn for their horses and milk cow, a chicken coop, and a garden plot that Clara immediately began planning. "It is like a dream," Clara said, standing in the kitchen and looking around at the space. "I never thought we would have something like this." "You deserve it," Jake said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You deserve this and so much more." They threw themselves into making the homestead their own. Jake built furniture in the evenings, a proper table and chairs, beds for the children, a rocking chair for Clara. Clara sewed curtains and quilts, planted the garden, and turned the house into a warm, welcoming home. The children thrived in the new space with room to run and play. In the fall of 1881, Thomas married his sweetheart, a sweet girl named Mary, and they moved to a small ranch that her father helped them purchase. Jake and Clara attended the wedding, proud of the man Thomas had become, grateful that he had found happiness despite the hardships of his childhood. That winter, Clara told Jake she was pregnant again, and in the spring of 1882 they welcomed another son whom they named Matthew. Their family felt complete now, 2 boys and a girl, all healthy and happy, growing up in a home filled with love and laughter. Jake became foreman of the Triple Bar when Dutch retired in 1882, and with the promotion came even more financial security. He was making good money now, enough that they could afford small luxuries like store-bought toys for the children and new dresses for Clara. But more than the money, Jake felt a deep satisfaction in the work, in managing the ranch and its crew, in the respect he had earned. The years passed quickly, measured in the milestones of their children's lives. Samuel started school, serious and studious like his grandfather had been. Elizabeth proved to be fearless and adventurous, always getting into mischief. Matthew was the baby, sweet-natured and content to follow wherever his older siblings led, and through it all, Jake and Clara's love deepened and matured. They had built something precious together, not just a family, but a partnership, a life that neither of them could have imagined in those early days when Jake had come upon Clara guarding a wounded calf. They talked about that day sometimes, usually late at night when the children were asleep, and they had time to themselves. Clara would curl up against Jake's side and they would remember how it had all started, how a simple act of compassion had led to everything they now had. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just ridden past that day?" Clara asked one evening in the summer of 1885 as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Never," Jake said firmly. "I do not believe in fate exactly, but I think some things are meant to be. I was meant to find you. We were meant to be together." "I think so too," Clara said softly. I was so lost back then, so focused on just surviving one day to the next, I had forgotten how to hope for anything better. And then you came along and gave me everything I had stopped letting myself want. You saved me too, Jake said, pulling her closer. I was drifting before I met you, just going through the motions. You gave me purpose, a reason to build something lasting instead of just moving from one job to the next. They kissed, a soft, familiar kiss that still held all the warmth and passion of those early days, and Jake felt a profound gratitude for the life they had built together. In 1886, the Triple Bar faced a crisis when the owner died suddenly, and his heirs back east decided to sell the ranch. Jake feared they would all lose their positions, that everything they had built would be swept away. But then the new owner arrived, a wealthy cattleman from Texas, and after surveying the operation, he called Jake into the office. "I am told you are the man who keeps this place running," the new owner, Mr. Dalton, said. "I want to keep you on as foreman with a partnership stake in the operation, 20% ownership and a share of the profits. What do you say?" Jake was stunned. Partnership in a ranch the size of the Triple Bar would make him a wealthy man by any measure. "I say yes, sir, and thank you." Mr. Dalton extended his hand. "I believe in rewarding good work and loyalty, Mr. Morrison. Let us make this ranch the most successful operation in Wyoming." Jake rode home that evening with his head spinning, barely able to believe the turn his life had taken. When he told Clara the news, she threw her arms around him and laughed with pure joy. "Jake Morrison, partner in the Triple Bar Ranch," she said, shaking her head in wonder. "Who would have thought? We have come a long way from that sod house," Jake agreed. "We have come a long way from that day with the calf," Clara corrected. "That is where it all started. That is where we started." Over the next few years, the ranch prospered under Jake's management and Mr. Dalton's investment. They expanded their herds, improved their grazing land, and became known for producing some of the finest beef cattle in the territory. Jake's share of the profits allowed them to save money, to invest in their children's education, to help Thomas and Mary when they needed it. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to go to college back east and become a veterinarian like his grandfather had been. Jake and Clara were proud and encouraged him, even though it meant he would be far from home for several years. Elizabeth, at 12, was already showing signs of being a skilled horsewoman, and she followed Jake around the ranch whenever she could, learning the cattle business. Matthew was quiet and loved books, spending hours reading in the shade of the big cottonwood tree by the house. In 1889, Wyoming achieved statehood, and Jake and Clara attended the celebration in Cheyenne with their children. It felt symbolic somehow, as if the territory growing into something more established and permanent mirrored their own journey from struggling homesteaders to prosperous ranch partners. That fall, Thomas and Mary welcomed their third child, and Jake and Clara became grandparents to another healthy grandson. Holding the baby, Jake marveled at how his life had unfolded, at the family that had grown from that chance encounter 11 years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, watching him rock the baby. "About everything," Jake said. "About how lucky I am, about how different my life would be if I had not found you that day." "Our lives would both be different," Clara said, "and not for the better." As the years continued to pass, Jake and Clara watched their children grow into adults with lives of their own. Samuel graduated from veterinary school in 1895 and returned to Wyoming to open a practice, eventually marrying a teacher from back east and settling in Cheyenne. Elizabeth married a neighboring rancher's son in 1893, a good man who treated her well, and they started their own small ranch with help from Jake and Clara. Matthew proved to have a gift for numbers and business, and when he came of age, Jake brought him on to help manage the financial side of the Triple Bar. The boy, now a man, had a sharp mind and helped the ranch navigate the changing economics of the cattle industry as the frontier era gave way to a more modern West. Thomas's ranch prospered as well, and he and Mary ended up with 5 children total, all of them healthy and happy. Family gatherings became large, boisterous affairs, with children and grandchildren filling Jake and Clara's home with noise and laughter. Through it all, Jake and Clara remained each other's anchor and greatest love. They still took walks together in the evenings when they could, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. The passion of their early years had mellowed into something deeper and more enduring, a love built on shared history, on weathering life's storms together, on choosing each other every single day. In the spring of 1900, as the new century dawned, Jake and Clara celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, with friends and family coming from all over Wyoming to join the celebration. As Jake looked around at the crowd, at his and Clara's children and grandchildren, at Thomas and his family, at the friends and neighbors who had become like family, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Jake and Clara sat on their porch as they had done countless times before, watching the stars come out. 20 years, Clara said softly. It seems like forever and no time at all. The best 20 years of my life, Jake said. Mine too, Clara agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then said, Do you remember what you said to me the night before you left to take the calf back to the ranch? The first time you left, I said I would come back in 3 days, Jake recalled. That I would come back to see you. And you said you felt like you had found something you had not known you were looking for, Clara continued. I think about that sometimes, about how we were both looking for something without realizing it and then we found each other. I was looking for home, Jake said. I just did not know it until I met you. You became my home, Clara. You and our family, this life we have built. That is what I was searching for all those years. And I was looking for hope, Clara said. For a reason to believe the future could be better than the present. You gave me that, Jake. You gave me everything. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, remembering and savoring. Jake thought about that day in the arroyo, about the young woman guarding a wounded calf with such fierce determination. He thought about the decision he had made to stay, to help, to keep coming back. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, but it had changed the entire trajectory of his life. I would do it all again, Jake said suddenly. Every moment, every choice, I would do it all exactly the same way. So would I, Clara whispered. The years continued their steady march forward. Jake eventually stepped back from active management of the Triple Bar, though he remained a partner and advisor. He spent his days working around their homestead, enjoying his grandchildren when they visited and being with Clara. They traveled some, taking a trip to San Francisco in 1905 that Clara had always dreamed of, and visiting Samuel in Cheyenne regularly. Their children gave them more grandchildren, 12 in total, and then great-grandchildren began to arrive. Jake and Clara's home remained the gathering place for the family, the anchor that held them all together. Holiday meals and summer barbecues brought everyone together, and Jake loved nothing more than sitting back and watching his descendants interact. Knowing that all of this had sprung from that day, he had chosen to help a young woman in need. As they grew older, Jake and Clara's health began to decline in the gentle way of people who had lived full, satisfying lives. They slowed down but remained active, still taking short walks together, still sitting on the porch in the evenings, still loving each other with the deep, abiding affection of a lifetime together. In the summer of 1915, Jake turned 63 and Clara turned 59. They had been married for 35 years, had built a legacy that extended through 3 generations, and had loved each other through all of it. One evening that summer, as they sat on the porch watching another spectacular Wyoming sunset, Clara leaned her head on Jake's shoulder and sighed with contentment. "This is enough," she said quietly. "All of this, everything we have had together, it is more than enough. It is everything." "It is," Jake agreed, kissing the top of her head. "You are everything, Clara. You always have been." They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Jake felt a peace settle over him that went bone deep. He had found his purpose in life, had built something meaningful and lasting, had loved and been loved in return. What more could any man ask for? Their children worried about them sometimes, suggesting they might want to move to town where life would be easier, where they could be closer to doctors and have less work to do. But Jake and Clara always refused. This homestead was their home, filled with memories of raising their children, of building their life together. They would stay here as long as they could, surrounded by the land and the life they loved. As Jake looked at Clara in the fading light, he saw the girl she had been, fierce and brave and beautiful, still visible in the woman she had become. Time had changed them both, adding lines to their faces and silver to their hair, but the essential core of who they were, of what they meant to each other, remained unchanged. "I love you," Jake said, as he had said countless times over the years. "I will always love you." "And I love you," Clara replied, as she always did. "Until the end of time." They sat together as darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built a beautiful life together. They had started with nothing but hope and determination, with a wounded calf and a chance meeting in an arroyo, and they had turned it into everything that mattered. The crickets began their evening song, and a cool breeze drifted across the porch, carrying with it the scent of Clara's roses and the distant sound of cattle lowing. Jake squeezed Clara's hand gently, and she squeezed back, and they remained there together as they had for so many years, watching over the land and the life they had built, content and complete in their love for each other. In the distance, a coyote howled, and Jake remembered that day so long ago when he had fired a shot to scare away the predators threatening a wounded calf. That single moment had led to this, to a lifetime of love, to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, to a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. He had helped Clara save that calf, and in doing so, they had saved each other. Their story had started with an act of compassion, and had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. A love story for the ages, played out against the backdrop of the wild Wyoming territory as it transformed into the modern West. They had weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs, had raised a family and built an empire, and through it all, they had never forgotten that first day, that first moment when their paths had crossed, and their fates had become forever intertwined. As the moon rose over the prairie, casting silver light across the land, Jake and Clara Morrison sat together on their porch, two souls who had found their home in each other, living proof that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest act of kindness. And they knew, with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of loving, that they would face whatever days remained to them together, just as they had faced everything else, side by side, hand in hand, hearts forever joined. The seasons continued to turn, bringing the vibrant colors of autumn and then the stark beauty of winter. Jake and Clara moved through their days with the comfortable rhythm of people who had shared a life for decades, anticipating each other's needs, finishing each other's sentences, communicating as much with a glance as with words. That winter was particularly harsh, with blizzards that piled snow higher than Jake could remember in years. They spent long hours inside by the fire, and Jake built up a good supply of wood to keep them warm. Their children and grandchildren worried about them being isolated on the homestead, but Jake and Clara were content. They had weathered worse together and knew they would weather this too. Clara spent the winter months quilting, her skilled fingers creating intricate patterns from scraps of fabric that held memories. A piece of Samuel's baby blanket here, a scrap from Elizabeth's wedding dress there, fabric from Matthew's first shirt. She was making a quilt for each of their grandchildren, wanting them to have something made by her hands, something that would remind them of her love long after she was gone. Jake spent his time carving and repairing things around the house, keeping busy in the ways he always had. But mostly, he simply enjoyed being with Clara, savoring every moment they had together. He had learned long ago not to take time for granted, to appreciate the ordinary moments that made up a life, sharing morning coffee, reading together by the fire, the sound of Clara's laughter, the warmth of her hand in his. When spring finally arrived in 1916, bringing the prairie back to life with wildflowers and new grass, Jake and Clara emerged from their winter cocoon, feeling grateful for another season together. Samuel came to visit with his family, and they spent a wonderful week catching up, playing with the grandchildren, and simply being together as a family. "You and Ma look good," Samuel told Jake one evening as they stood outside watching the sunset. "Happy. We are happy," Jake confirmed. "We have been blessed with a good life, Samuel. Your mother and I know that." "You built a good life," Samuel corrected gently. "You worked hard for everything you have. You should be proud." "I am proud," Jake said, "but mostly I am grateful. Grateful that I found your mother when I did, grateful for the family we built, grateful for every day I have had with her." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then said, "You really love her, do not you? After all these years, it is still as strong as ever." "Stronger," Jake said simply. "Love is not something that fades if you tend to it properly. Your mother is the best thing that ever happened to me, and I fall in love with her a little more every single day." That summer brought a family reunion that would be remembered for years to come. All of Jake and Clara's children came with their families, along with Thomas and his brood, and for one glorious week, the homestead was filled to bursting with 3 generations of family. They ate meals together at the long table Jake had built years ago, with extra boards added to accommodate everyone. They told stories and sang songs and took photographs to commemorate the occasion. One afternoon, as Clara surveyed the chaos of children playing in the yard and adults scattered across the porch and lawn, she squeezed Jake's hand and whispered, "Look at what we made. Look at all these beautiful people who exist because we found each other." Jake looked and felt his chest tighten with emotion. She was right. This entire extended family, these dozens of people laughing and living and loving, existed because he had chosen to help a young woman guarding a wounded calf 40 years ago. The ripple effects of that single decision were staggering. "We did good," Jake said, his voice rough with feeling. "We did real good, Clara." As the summer faded into fall, Jake and Clara settled back into their quiet routine, enriched by the memories of the family gathering. They maintained their homestead with the help of hired hands that Matthew arranged for them, but they were still independent and capable, still living life on their own terms. In October, as the leaves turned golden and the air grew crisp, Jake and Clara took a walk to the creek where they had spent so many evenings over the years. It was harder now, their steps slower and more careful, but they made it, and they sat on the bank watching the water flow past just as they had done countless times before. "I have been thinking about the calf," Clara said suddenly. "The one you helped me save. Do you remember what happened to it?" Jake did remember. It healed up fine and grew into a healthy steer. Dutch sold it with a batch of cattle that went to market the next year. "Why?" "I was just thinking about how strange it is that our entire life together started because of that animal," Clara said. "If those coyotes had gotten it before I found it, or if you had not come along when you did, or if the wounds had been too severe to heal, everything would have been different." "But those things did not happen," Jake said. "I did come along and we did save it, and everything unfolded exactly as it was meant to." "Do you believe in fate?" Clara asked, echoing a conversation they had had years before. Jake thought about it carefully before answering. "I believe in choices. I believe I made a choice that day to help you, and you made a choice to trust me, and we kept making choices every day after that to love each other and build this life together. Maybe fate put us in that arroyo at the same time, but we are the ones who decided what to do with that opportunity." Clara smiled, that soft smile that Jake had loved for 40 years. I like that. It gives us credit for all the work we put in, all the love we chose to give each other. We earned this, Jake agreed. Every bit of it. They sat by the creek until the sun began to set, and then Jake helped Clara to her feet and they walked slowly back to the house, leaning on each other for support in the ways they always had, sometimes physically, always emotionally. The years of 1917 and 1918 brought the shadow of the Great War in Europe, and while Wyoming was far from the battlefields, the conflict still touched their lives. Two of Thomas's sons enlisted and served overseas, and the entire family spent anxious months worrying and praying for their safe return. When both young men came home in 1919, scarred but alive, the family gathered to celebrate and give thanks. Jake was 67 now, Clara 63, and they were feeling their age more with each passing year. But they were still together, still loving each other, still making new memories even as their bodies grew frailer. They attended the weddings of their grandchildren, welcomed more great-grandchildren, and remained the heart of their extended family. In the spring of 1920, as Jake and Clara approached their 40th wedding anniversary, their children planned a massive celebration. Family came from all over Wyoming and beyond, and friends from the Triple Bar and neighboring ranches joined in the festivities. It was a joyous occasion, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. At one point during the celebration, Matthew asked Jake and Clara to say a few words. Jake had never been much for public speaking, but he stood with Clara by his side and looked out at the sea of faces, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, friends both old and new, and felt compelled to share what was in his heart. 40 years ago, I made a promise to this woman, Jake began, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd. I promised to love her, to honor her, to stand by her through whatever life brought our way. It is the easiest promise I ever kept, because loving Clara has never been hard. It has been the greatest joy of my life. He paused, looking down at Clara, who had tears streaming down her face. We started with nothing, just hope and determination and love for each other. We built this life one day at a time, one choice at a time. And standing here now, surrounded by our family and friends, I can say with complete certainty that I would not change a single moment of the journey. Clara took over, her voice still strong despite her tears. Jake Morrison rode into my life on a hot summer day when I needed help saving a wounded calf. He stayed to help me save it, and then he never rode away again. He gave me everything I had stopped letting myself dream of: a home, a family, a love that has sustained me through every trial and celebrated every triumph. I am the luckiest woman in the world to have spent these 40 years as his wife, and I look forward to spending whatever time we have left together. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, and Jake and Clara were surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and expressing their love. It was a perfect day, a celebration of a love that had endured and flourished for 4 decades, and both Jake and Clara felt blessed beyond measure. As the party wound down and the sun began to set, Jake and Clara found a quiet spot away from the crowd and sat together, watching their family enjoy the celebration. 40 years, Jake said softly. Sometimes it feels like we just got married yesterday, and sometimes it feels like I have loved you my entire life. Both things are true, Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder in the familiar gesture that had comforted them both for decades. Time is strange that way. The years go by so fast, but the love just keeps growing. I hope we have another 40 years, Jake said, though they both knew that was unlikely given their ages. However long we have, it will be enough as long as we have it together, Clara replied. That is all I need, Jake. Just to be with you. They sat together as the stars began to emerge, watching their family celebrate the love story that had begun with a wounded calf and had grown into something magnificent. And in that moment, surrounded by the fruits of their life together, Jake and Clara Morrison knew that they had achieved something rare and precious, a love that had not just endured but had thrived, creating ripples of joy and family that would extend far beyond their own lives. The early 1920s brought changes to Wyoming and to the Morrison family. The automobile became more common, making travel easier and bringing the family together more frequently. Electricity reached their area, and Jake had their home wired, marveling at the convenience of electric lights after a lifetime of oil lamps. Clara loved the electric stove, though she admitted she sometimes missed cooking over a wood fire. Their children were all well established in their own lives now, successful and happy, raising families that were a credit to the values Jake and Clara had instilled in them. The grandchildren were growing up, some of them already marrying and starting families of their own. The great-grandchildren numbered in the teens now, and Jake had given up trying to keep track of all their names and ages, relying on Clara's better memory. But even as life modernized around them, Jake and Clara held onto the simple rhythms that had sustained them for so long. They still took walks when the weather was good, still sat on the porch in the evenings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. Their love had only deepened with time, becoming as essential and natural as breathing. In the fall of 1923, Jake began to feel his age in ways he never had before. Simple tasks left him winded, and he tired more easily than he wanted to admit. Clara noticed, of course, she always noticed, and insisted he see the doctor in town. The diagnosis was his heart, weakened by age and a lifetime of hard work, and the doctor advised rest and reduced activity. Jake followed the doctor's orders as best he could, but it frustrated him to be limited in what he could do. He had always been an active man, and idleness did not suit him. Clara managed to keep him occupied with less strenuous activities, reading, playing checkers, whittling small toys for the great-grandchildren, but Jake chafed at the restrictions. "I hate being old and useless," Jake admitted one evening as they sat by the fire. "You are neither old nor useless," Clara said firmly. "You are the cornerstone of this family, Jake Morrison. Your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren all look up to you. You give them wisdom and love and an example of how to live a good life. That is hardly useless." "I just wish I could still do all the things I used to do," Jake said. "I wish I could still ride all day, still fix the barn roof, still dance with you the way we used to." Clara took his hand gently. "We have had 45 years together, Jake. 45 years of adventures and hard work and building this life. If the time comes when all we can do is sit together and hold hands, that will be enough. You are enough, exactly as you are." Jake squeezed her hand, grateful beyond words for this woman who had been his partner through everything. "How did I get so lucky?" he wondered aloud. "We found each other," Clara said simply. "We chose each other, and we worked every day to love each other well. That is not luck, Jake. That is effort and commitment and grace." The winter of 1923 into 1924 was mild, for which Jake was grateful. He spent his days mostly inside, reading and resting, while Clara tended to household tasks and maintained her correspondence with their far-flung family members. They had visits from various children and grandchildren throughout the season, and each visit brought Jake renewed energy and joy. In February, on the anniversary of the day they had first met, Jake surprised Clara with a gift. He had commissioned a painting from an artist in town, working from one of the photographs taken at their 40th anniversary party. The painting showed them surrounded by their family, but Clara's eyes in the painting were fixed on Jake with such love and warmth that it took her breath away. "This is beautiful," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Jake, this must have cost a fortune." "You are worth every penny," Jake said simply. "I wanted you to have something that shows what we built together, something that captures this family, this love, this life." They hung the painting in a place of honor in the parlor, where everyone who visited could see it. And Clara would often stand in front of it, studying the faces of her children and grandchildren, marveling at how blessed they had been. Spring brought renewed vitality to Jake, and he felt strong enough to venture outside more often. He and Clara resumed their evening walks, moving slowly but enjoying the fresh air and the sight of new life emerging all around them. The prairie bloomed with wildflowers, and the cattle grew fat on the new grass, and everything seemed right with the world. On a warm evening in late May, Jake and Clara sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had performed thousands of times over the decades. The sky was spectacular, streaked with orange and pink and purple, and Jake felt a profound peace settle over him. "Clara," Jake said quietly, "I need you to know something." She looked at him, concerned by his serious tone. "What is it?" "I need you to know that these years with you have been the greatest blessing of my life," Jake said. "Every single day I have spent as your husband has been a gift. You made me a better man, gave me a purpose, and loved me in ways I never deserved but always needed. If I died tomorrow, I would die the happiest man who ever lived because I had you." "Jake, you are scaring me," Clara said, gripping his hand tightly. "Why are you talking like this?" "I am not dying," Jake assured her quickly. "At least, no more than we all are. I just wanted you to know, wanted to say it clearly while I can. I love you, Clara Morrison. I have loved you since the day I saw you guarding that calf, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Clara whispered, tears running down her face. "More than words could ever express. You are my heart, Jake. You always have been." They held each other as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge, two souls bound together by love and time, savoring another precious moment in a lifetime full of them. The summer of 1924 was beautiful, full of sunshine and family visits and quiet contentment. Jake's health remained stable, and he felt stronger than he had in months. They celebrated Clara's 68th birthday with a gathering of the family, and the house rang with laughter and love. It was a good season, a golden time, and both Jake and Clara treasured every moment. In August, Thomas came to visit with news that he and Mary were celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary. They wanted Jake and Clara to join them for a party at their ranch, and despite the distance and the effort involved, Jake and Clara agreed to go. They packed carefully and made the journey in a comfortable automobile that Matthew arranged for them, and they spent a wonderful weekend celebrating with Thomas and Mary and their large, boisterous family. Seeing Thomas, who was 50 now with gray in his hair and laugh lines around his eyes, Jake marveled at how time had passed. He remembered the scared, grieving 12-year-old boy he had taken in and felt proud of the man Thomas had become. Clara felt it too, and she squeezed Jake's hand as they watched Thomas dance with Mary, both of them still clearly in love after 3.5 decades. "We did good with him," Clara whispered. "We did," Jake agreed. "You did. You were the one who raised him, who gave him the love and stability he needed." "We both did," Clara insisted. "You were as much a father to him as I was a mother. He is as much your son as Samuel or Matthew." Jake felt the truth of that in his bones. Thomas was his son in all the ways that mattered, and he loved the man as fiercely as he loved his biological children. Family, he had learned long ago, was not just about blood, it was about choice, commitment, and love. As fall arrived and the leaves began to turn, Jake and Clara settled back into their quiet routine, feeling content and blessed. They had been married for 46 years now, had built a legacy that would endure for generations, and had loved each other through all of it. What more could anyone ask from a life? On a crisp October morning, Jake woke to find Clara still sleeping beside him, her face peaceful in the early light. He studied her, seeing past the lines and gray hair to the fierce, beautiful young woman he had fallen in love with so long ago. She was still there, still the person he loved more than life itself. Clara stirred and opened her eyes, catching Jake watching her. She smiled, that soft, intimate smile reserved only for him. "Good morning." "Good morning, my love," Jake replied, leaning over to kiss her gently. "Sleep well." "Always do when I am next to you," Clara said, stretching carefully. "What should we do today?" "Whatever you want," Jake said. "We have all day and know where we have to be." They spent the day doing simple, ordinary things, eating breakfast together, tending to small chores around the house, reading side by side in the parlor. And yet there was nothing ordinary about it, because they were together, because after 46 years they still chose to spend their time with each other, because love had not faded but had grown deeper and richer with each passing year. As evening approached, they bundled up against the cooling air and took a slow walk around their property. The harvest was done, the land preparing for winter, and everything felt settled and right. They walked hand in hand, not talking much, simply being together. When they returned to the house, Clara made them dinner and they ate by candlelight, enjoying the simple meal and each other's company. After dinner, they sat by the fire, and Jake pulled out the harmonica he had not played in years. He played the old songs they both knew, and Clara sang along in her still sweet voice, and for a little while, they were young again, courting on the porch of that old sod house, discovering the joy of finding someone who truly understood them. "Play our song," Clara requested, and Jake obliged, playing the melody of Beautiful Dreamer, which had been popular when they first married and had become their song over the years. Clara closed her eyes and swayed gently to the music, and Jake played for her, pouring all his love into the notes. When the song ended, Clara opened her eyes and smiled at him. "Thank you, Jake, for everything, for this life, this love, all of it." "Thank you," Jake replied, "for saving me, for loving me, for making every day an adventure and a joy." They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for another day together, another evening of simple pleasures and deep love. And as Jake drifted off to sleep, he felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to his eyes. This was what life was meant to be, not grand adventures or great fortunes, but simple moments of connection and love with the person who meant everything. Jake Morrison passed away peacefully in his sleep on October 15, 1924, with Clara beside him. He was 72 years old and had lived a full, rich life. He died as he had lived his last 46 years, with Clara's hand in his, surrounded by love. The funeral was the largest the county had ever seen. Family came from across Wyoming and beyond, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren. Friends from the Triple Bar, neighbors, and people whose lives Jake had touched over the decades all came to pay their respects to a man who had lived with integrity, kindness, and love. Clara stood at the graveside with her children supporting her, dry-eyed but devastated. A part of her had died with Jake, the part that had come alive the day he had ridden into her life and chosen to stay. She knew she would miss him every moment of every day for however long she had left. They buried Jake on the same hill where Samuel Whitfield had been laid to rest 44 years before, under the cottonwood tree that had stood sentinel over their lives. The marker reads simply, "Jake Morrison, 1852 to 1924, beloved husband, father, and friend." He helped save a calf and found his life's purpose. Clara lived for another 6 years after Jake's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She never remarried. How could she, when her heart belonged to Jake and always would? But she found contentment in her family and in the memories of the life she and Jake had built together. She told the story often to anyone who would listen. About the day a cowboy had found her guarding a wounded calf, about how he had helped her save it and then never rode away again, about how that single act of compassion had blossomed into a love story that spanned 46 years and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Clara Morrison passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night in 1930, surrounded by her children. She was 74 years old. They buried her next to Jake under the cottonwood tree, and her marker read, "Clara Morrison, 1856 to 1930, beloved wife, mother, and friend." She was his heart and home. The Morrison legacy continued through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, spreading across Wyoming and beyond. The homestead remained in the family for generations, and the story of Jake and Clara became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. A reminder of what love could build when tended with care and commitment. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, when the wind blows just right across the Wyoming prairie, you can almost hear the echo of a harmonica playing Beautiful Dreamer and the sound of a woman's voice singing along. Two souls joined forever by a love that began with a wounded calf and a choice to help, to stay, to love, and to build something beautiful together. Their story lived on as the years passed, becoming part of the rich history of Wyoming territory turned state. The Triple Bar Ranch continued to prosper, eventually being passed down through the family line. Matthew Morrison took over management after Jake's death, running it with the same integrity and wisdom his father had demonstrated. The ranch became known not just for its quality cattle, but for the way it treated its workers, fairly and with respect, just as Jake had always insisted. Samuel Morrison's veterinary practice grew into one of the most respected in Wyoming, and he trained several young veterinarians who went on to serve communities throughout the state. He never forgot that his grandfather had been a veterinarian too, and that his mother had learned enough from her father to save a wounded calf, the action that had ultimately led to Samuel's very existence. Elizabeth's ranch thrived as well, and she proved to be as skilled a cattlewoman as her father had been a cattleman. She raised 4 children who all stayed in Wyoming, continuing the family's deep roots in the land that had given their grandparents so much. Thomas lived to be 87, always crediting Jake and Clara with saving his life and giving him a future. He told his children and grandchildren about the dark days after his father died, and about how Jake Morrison had stepped in and become the father he needed. The bond between Thomas's descendants and Jake and Clara's biological children remained strong through the generations, proof that family was indeed about more than just blood. The homestead where Jake and Clara had raised their family was preserved by the family, maintained with care and love. It became a gathering place for the extended Morrison clan, especially during summers and holidays. The big cottonwood tree continued to stand guard over the graves of Jake and Clara, providing shade for family members who came to pay their respects and remember the couple whose love had started it all. The painting Jake had commissioned for Clara was passed down through the family, eventually being donated to the Wyoming State Museum, where it hung alongside other artifacts of the state's pioneer history. Next to it, the museum displayed the story of Jake and Clara Morrison, the cowboy and the young woman guarding a wounded calf, whose chance meeting had led to a love story that exemplified the best of the Old West: courage, perseverance, compassion, and enduring love. The calf that had brought them together, though long since gone to market, lived on in family lore. It became a symbol of how small acts of kindness and compassion could change lives in unexpected and profound ways. The story was told to each new generation. If Jake had ridden past that day, if Clara had given up on the wounded animal, if either of them had made different choices, the entire family would never have existed. As the 20th century progressed, and Wyoming changed from frontier territory to modern state, the story of Jake and Clara Morrison remained a touchstone for the values that had built the West: hard work, determination, loyalty, and above all, love. Their descendants spread across the country, but they always carried with them the story of their ancestors who had found each other in an arroyo, had helped save a wounded calf together, and had built a life and legacy that proved love was the greatest adventure of all. And so the story ends as all good stories should, not with an ending, but with a legacy that continues. Jake and Clara Morrison lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a family that would carry their values and their story forward into the future. They had started with nothing but hope in each other, and they had built something that would endure long after they were gone. In the end, that is all any of us can hope for: to love and be loved, to build something meaningful, and to leave the world a little better than we found it. Jake and Clara Morrison did all of that and more, And their story serves as a reminder that the greatest treasures in life are not found in wealth or fame, but in the simple act of choosing to love someone well, every single day for a lifetime. The cowboy had found her guarding a wounded calf. He had helped her save it, and he had never ridden away again. From that single day, that single choice, had sprung a love story that would be told for generations. A testament to the power of compassion, the strength of commitment, and the enduring beauty of a love that grows deeper and richer with each passing year. And somewhere in the vast Wyoming sky, under the endless stars that had witnessed their love story, Jake and Clara Morrison remained together, just as they always had been, just as they always would be, two souls who had found their home in each other and had built a legacy that would never fade.